Let's go to the circus that is the media. There is an awesome clip that will make you feel all warm inside. Let's all run to the empathy tent for Chuck Todd. Listen to what Chuck Todd said about the U.S. Constitution.
Roy Moore, where the phrase Christian conservative doesn't even begin to describe him, could very well be your next U.S. senator.
Can we stop there?
And you don't understand just how...
What exactly does that mean? Where the words Christian conservative doesn't even begin to describe him. What does that mean?
That's interesting. I think maybe he's trying to say...
What?
He's super extra mega Doppler Christian-y.
Yeah.
Like he's over the top Christian. Maybe a little too Christian.
Listen to that.
Yeah.
Where Christian conservative doesn't even begin to describe him.
I guess that he's so extreme on that. He's so far down that Christian
rabbit hole.
road.
Yeah. Oh, that is all I know.
Like you could say Christian, like a Christian conservative, you could describe a lot of people that way, right? That don't necessarily talk all the time about God, right? They might have Christian values. They might support generally socially conservative platforms or whatever. Roy talks about it all the time, maybe too much.
Yes.
Maybe he's thinking about God too much.
Okay.
That's what he's saying.
Okay. All right. Okay. So go ahead.
could very well be your next U.S. senator. If you don't understand just how freaked out some folks in the GOP and the White House are about what that means, then you don't know Roy Moore. First off, he doesn't appear to believe in the Constitution.
Stop!
Wow.
Did you know this?
I didn't know that.
Did you know this when you voted for him? He doesn't even believe in the Constitution.
It's a huge problem.
And it's a huge statement today to make. I'm sure Chuck is going to back that up.
As it's written.
Our rights don't come from government. They don't come from a Bill of Rights. They come from Almighty God.
Now, that's just a taste of what are very fundamentalist views that have gotten him removed from office twice as Alabama's Chief Justice.
Wait a minute.
Hold it just a second. That's just a taste. No, that's a whole meal right there. What he just said, that's not a taste. That's the whole thing. That's breakfast, lunch, dinner, dessert, snacks. That's all of it.
I feel like we need to hear the whole thing again in context because that's an amazing moment.
Yeah, because I don't understand what he's saying. He doesn't believe in the Constitution. Instead, he believes this crazy idea that your rights don't come from government.
Roy Moore, where the phrase Christian conservative doesn't even begin to describe him, could very well be your next U.S. senator. If you don't understand just how freaked out some folks in the GOP and the White House are about what that means, then you don't know Roy Moore. First off, he doesn't appear to believe in the Constitution as it's written.
Our rights don't come from government. They don't come from a Bill of Rights. They come from Almighty God.
Now, that's just a taste of what are very fundamentalist views that have gotten him removed from office twice as Alabama's Chief Justice.
Okay, so Chuck.
Because you like Chuck.
I do. I like Chuck.
You've been on the show many times.
I like Chuck. I think he's a reasonable, nice guy. And
a smart guy. Certainly an informed guy.
He is. This is not. Here's the problem with this. Let's say, I don't know. Let's say Oliver Stone says something like this. You're like, okay, it's Oliver Stone. And you know he's a Marxist, so whatever, okay? You hear somebody like, I don't know, what's her name with the twerking, what's her face?
Miley Cyrus?
Miley Cyrus. You hear somebody like Miley Cyrus say something like this, and you're like, it's Miley frickin' Cyrus, of course. You hear a college student say something like this, and you're like, okay, that's concerning. But they're not teaching anything in school anymore. They have an empathy tent. But when you hear the guy who hosts Meet the Press say this with such conviction, that's terrifying.
And to escalate it one further step, saying it with that conviction in a pre-written piece. This is not him in a debate off the top of his head going down the wrong road.
So wait, you're not saying that there were writers, producers, all the way along that were reading that script, preparing this material, talking about it in meetings, and no one said, guys, we're 100% wrong on this. It's not even close. I just want to point out, it's not even close. By saying these things, you're going to look like the biggest idiot on the planet because you've engaged in some sort of revisionist history. But beyond that, it shows you completely misunderstand the entire American standard.
And maybe we should not assume everyone is familiar with this standard, but your rights come
hang on.
from God.
Hold on just a second. I need a moment to, could I build an empathy tent in my head for just a second? Let me just for a second, it's nice. It's not one of those cheap white vinyl tents. This is a nice one with the little pointy thing, and a little flag on top or something, but not an American flag. God forbid, not an American flag, but just like a little.
It's nice.
Okay. It's air conditioned if you're hot. It's cool if it's hot outside. It's warm if it's cold outside. And there's little throw pillows and maybe rugs. Okay. A place where you can just go and.
Do you feel calm enough now?
I do.
Okay.
So now, Chuck, let's talk about this. Where do your rights come from? Does the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights, is that the source of those rights? Or does it say in the Constitution that there are more rights, but these are just the big ones that we're going to concentrate on, that the government must never violate?
It's a document of, let's say, negative liberties. Is that how you'd?
Yes.
Is that how you'd phrase that?
In fact, in communist Russia, they had a charter of positive liberties, which said these are the things that the government must do. Our Constitution is a charter of negative liberties, saying that these liberties are to never be violated. The government can never do these things. So if the government if the document, the Bill of Rights, the most game-changing document of all time, if that is the printing press for rights, what made that document a game changer? Because I just want you to think this through. Chuck and everybody, could you give me some more of that empathy tent music just for a second, just in case anybody has slipped in, somebody new? Oh. See, it's peaceful, it's warm, it's nice, it's comfortable.
That is nice.
Yeah. There's somebody just like you in this tent, okay? And then there's me. But to concentrate on the person just like you for a second. Okay, we got it. Thank you. Now, what made the Constitution game-changing? Because the world had kings that could just go and just scoop you up. And it could scoop you up, and the king could say, you know what, I'm going to chop off his head. Why? I don't have to tell you why. Wait, why don't you have to tell me why? Could you answer that one? Yeah, I'm the king. Yeah, but you're what? I'm the king. You're nothing. Now, the reason why King Arthur was so great in that legend of King Arthur is because King Arthur thought, hey, I'm no better than you. Let's just all be together. That was a benevolent king. And you'll notice that King Arthur didn't exist. Okay, that's a legend. Camelot didn't exist. It was an idea. So the pilgrims came over and they said, you know what? We only answer to God. And God gives us certain rights. And the government is instituted among men, by men, to protect those God-given rights.
Who gave them?
God.
Government?
God. No,
Oh,
God.
okay.
I know they will start with G. And
O.
Yes.
That's really confusing.
And so you can be, because people have a very short attention span. G-O, it could be government. I don't know. I didn't read the whole word. Okay, so those were given by God, because if they're not given by God, then they have to be given by man. And when they're given by man, then a man, any man, left, right, upside down, doesn't matter. Any man can say, you know what? No, I have that right. You don't. That's why the rights, you can call it God. You can call it the universe. You can call it just a really happy star, a happy place.
You could even say, for example, we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. Something you could phrase it that way. I guess.
Need an empathy tent to be able to hear that kind of language myself. But
is it stressing you out?
It's stressing me
out.
I don't feel uncomfortable. I feel unsafe.
Oh my.
Okay, there's no difference between feeling uncomfortable with somebody's idea and feeling unsafe. Let's see, having a conversation that where somebody's saying something uncomfortable to me and being raped or beaten. No, that's the same. I need a safe zone to hear your unsafe language, Stu, so stop it. You can call God whatever you want, but you have to understand that if you don't have a God, a higher source other than man, giving rights to you, every single soul, then that means somebody can take those rights away. That was the game-changing idea of America. There's no reason that this was revolutionary at its time. There's no reason if the rights just came from government, because they had always done that. We've been asked to see if we could use my plane as a cargo plane for Puerto Rico to get supplies there, so we may be taking our vacation sweetheart in Puerto Rico. But just want to throw that out real quick. The problem with this is the cargo. Getting the cargo there is hard enough, but then all of the cargo is being left at the airport, and the reason why is because they can't find the truck drivers. There's no cell phones. Nobody has a cell phone. What about the trucks? Where are the trucks? And there's no fuel to put into the trucks. So all of the cargo is starting to stack up at the airport. We have Team Rubicon going in, and we may just be airlifting people over there. But we have Team Rubicon that is on the ground now doing an assessment on exactly what we can do to help. This is kind of like a Marshall Plan kind of thing. The government is really required to help in Puerto Rico on this one.
The unauthorized autobiography of Kim Jong-il. Also hosts the podcast You're Welcome, which is up on Anthony Cumia's platform, which is pretty cool. And Michael joins us now.
Michael, there are plant closings now from China in North Korea. There's a new travel ban, and there is also the warm beers on kind of this press junket now, talking about what North Korea did to their son from Ohio.
Right.
Where are we headed?
Well, let's talk about the warm beers, because the news has just changed in the last 12 hours. The last time I was on this show, the point I had made is that North Korea, in defiance of what we think, tends to keep their hostages safe, because you want to return the hostage to get the ransom, right? Otto Warmbier's parents went on air, all these different shows, and said he was severely tortured. His teeth were rearranged by pliers, deaf and blind, just a horrific portrait. However, and I'm like, what, did I get it all wrong? If I did get it wrong, and with North Korea, you have to realize, to paraphrase an old line they used about Lillian Hellman, everything they say is a lie, including and the, every word they say. So you really have to kind of read between the lines. The coroner came out and said the parents were not saying what they saw. The coroner said on record his teeth were fine, there were no evidence of broken bones or recently healed bones, and there were no evidence of torture. They didn't do an autopsy. They did an external examination. So we have a discrepancy that I frankly don't know how to reconcile.
Why would, I mean, see, here's my thought, Michael. When I saw the warm beers on, I thought, okay, why is this coming out now? He came home a while ago, and I do not want to play into conspiracies, but if you look at history, when people want to build a case for war, these are the kinds of things that happen. The government kind of pushes it out, and you kind of massage the idea that these are really bad people and we should go to war. I'm not saying that I don't believe the warm beers. I don't know, but that was the first thought that came into my head. But if the coroner is saying that's not true, right? What is happening?
For the coroner, who's obviously a reputable person, there's a whole team. For them to say on the record, we're surprised the parents are saying this. This is at the very least very odd. However, in a sense, this is secondary. This young man was murdered. This young man was imprisoned. This young man, according to North Korea, was sentenced to 15 years hard labor for stealing a poster. He was a hostage. So when you have a nation that takes tourists, invited tourists who have a visa, if you have them grabbing people and holding them hostage, this is not a regime that recognizes international law and decency.
And it's also a regime that does do this and much worse to their own people.
Oh, and North Korea has admitted that for decades they've been kidnapping Japanese citizens from Japan and people from South Korea and keeping them hostage for decades. We think it's to teach people Japanese, to train them to be spies. So this has been going on for a very long time. In fact, in 2001, when the Japanese prime minister visited Pyongyang and they were having bilateral talks in hopes of normalizing relationships, at the time, the dear leader, Kim Jong-il, admitted this and apologized, thinking that Japan would be like, oh, forget about it, it's not a big deal. And the Japanese were gobsmacked. They couldn't believe that Kim Jong-il was admitting to this in such a cavalier manner and thinking just an apology would kind of, make it all go away.
Michael Malice is with us. He's the author of Dear Reader. He actually went over and spent time in North Korea and warns that they are it's not what you think it is. Can you take me to Donald Trump's speech in the UN? Back during World War II, when we were dealing with a crazy dictator named Hitler, FDR did not call him names or anything else, but the Marx Brothers, and probably most famously Charlie Chaplin in something called The Great Dictator, did mock him. And the way to get under the skin of a dictator is to mock them. They do not like that. Donald Trump was told, apparently, by his advisors, do not mock him at the UN. Don't call him names. Donald Trump did. Do you think that was effective for the president in this situation or not?
I can't think of anything smarter to do, because their whole pretense in North Korea, and they refer to us always as a slur, the U.S. imperialists, their pretense is that we're quaking in our boots because of Kim Jong-un, just like we had been scared of his father and of his grandfather. And I had met a refugee, and there was that movie that came out with James Franco and Seth Rogen, The Interview, a few years back. And she had said, it would be great if North Koreans saw this movie, not because it's clever or funny, it wasn't, because they would see we are treating him as a laughingstock. Now, this is someone his grandfather allegedly could walk on water, literally. They're taught these kind of miracles that go around these leaders. So you have to imagine how those translators have to. When you're using syntax, in North Korean, there's a form of language that only the leaders use. It's an honorific. You can't say his name by himself. You have to say Marshal Kim Jong-un or Dear Leader Kim Jong-il. So for them to try to translate something so colloquial as Rocket Man, it would be like, if you were a god and I'm calling you Glenny, it's just, you can't even wrap your head around it. Like, it's just a level of familiarity and disrespect.
Would the people in North Korea hear that?
Well, they wouldn't know what to do, because on the one hand, you want to say that, look, President Trump's a lunatic. He's rattling his saber. He's being aggressive. On the other hand, it would be very hard for them to even repeat that he's using such vulgar language, vulgar in a broad sense, to refer to the leader. So on the one hand, oh my gosh, he's disrespected. But let me use an extreme example. If another country used a 4-letter word in reference to President Trump, the media wouldn't know how to report it. Would they censor the word? Do you say it? If you're saying it, it's just horrific. So this is the quandary he forced North Korea to put themselves in, and this is him showing them, I'm not scared of you, and I don't think you're someone worthy of respect.
Talking to Michael Malice. Michael, there's a couple of interesting developments, one of the things we've been trying to do with North Korea is to get them to somehow have some pressure put on them from China. China is now announcing that they're closing all North Korean owned companies in their country. Malaysia has a new travel ban with North Korea. Are these things actually coming to fruition finally?
Yes, these are all wonderful, if small, developments, and we can see the consequences in this way. I think it was last week or earlier this week, the North Korean foreign minister had said, this was reported as an escalation when it was a de-escalation. He had said that President Trump has effectively declared war, and that if there's any bombers in North Korea, they're gonna shoot them down, right? Let's look what happened. Back in July, they're saying, we are going to bomb Guam. We've got 4 missiles ready. In August, we're going to attack Guam. Now, they're putting words in President Trump's mouth. They are saying, you are declaring war. We're the victims. We're the good guys. You're the bad guys. They're saying there's a difference between, Stu, I'm going to go to your house and burn it down, and if you come to my house, I'm going to shoot you. If the second neighbor might be a crank, I just won't go to his house. The first one's the problem. And this has been how their rhetoric has changed. It has been from, we're going to attack you, to, if you come here, we will defend ourselves, which is definitely a retreat, even though the press treats it as an escalation.
So then what does that mean, Michael? That's really good news. What does that mean for the future? What's coming our way?
One of the best things about how President Trump is dealing with North Korea, and this has also come out in the reports, most Americans don't know what to make of President Trump, right? And if you are from another country, try to explain going from President Obama to President Trump. These two men, even forget their politics, just in terms of personalities and style, are as different as can be. And President Trump has no political background whatsoever to kind of read between the lines, right? So North Korea doesn't know what to make of him, which in terms of negotiation is an extremely effective technique to have in your back pocket, because you don't know what this guy is capable of. So you had better put all your money on diplomacy and negotiation, because if he turns out to be someone capable of pulling the trigger, North Korea has explicitly and repeatedly said they know it would be a disaster for them.
So if you were looking at the doomsday clock and it's 3 minutes to midnight, the last time we talked, where do you put the hands?
I would put it to 4. In my opinion, because again, if you had all the UN voting against North Korea, if North Korea is appealing to the international community, if they're changing their tune and are trying to be dignified and legalistic, this is someone who is saying, okay, we took a wrong turn somewhere.
We are in the midst of really doing some dynamic thinking on the future of the media in its entirety. I don't think people really understand. I took a bunch of people out into the hallway yesterday where we have a big chalkboard, and I said, I just want you guys to, I want you to help me think things through here. I've been saying for a long time that the world is being changed, and all the way down maps. I said, we're going to wake up and the maps are going to be changed, and the infrastructure is being changed. And you can either be a part of that changing infrastructure and design it yourself, or you're going to find yourself working for somebody else, and you're just going to be in it. And I was talking to some members of the staff yesterday about what's coming in the media, and I said, I said, I want to take you to the Old West for a second. If we look at the Wild West, somebody had just said this to me the other day. It was maybe that Google ethicist who said, it's the Wild West is of the internet is coming to an end. And I think they're right. The Wild West, what it was is you could go out and you could start a town, and these towns would pop up everywhere, and just where people were congregating. So it might be because it was natural beauty or there were resources or whatever. But once the train started to be built, the states and the territories started to lobby, get the train to come to our town. And if the train didn't come to your town, that town ended up usually a ghost town. If your town was big enough and it was a city, the train would automatically come there. If not, you had to coax the train to come to be able to give you a place. Or if you were a place that had a lot of water or the coal or whatever they needed to keep the train going, the train would come to you. The Wild West was over once the train system was put into place, because then it wasn't just anywhere. The train kind of dictated the growth. The tracks have been laid, and the tracks now have been laid over the last 6 or 7 years. They've been laid by Amazon, Google, Apple, Netflix, Hulu. They've laid the tracks. And even Hulu is kind of an outpost. It's kind of an F troop, kind of way out in the middle of nowhere. The train tracks have been laid. And I'm sharing this with you because I don't think that conservative media is thinking this through. And it's changed right now. In the last 3 months, there has been dynamic shifts, and the tracks are clearly being laid and are already laid. And you can be your little outpost all you want, but I'm telling you, the tracks are already there. How do we get people on that train or near that train? So if any ship wants to come and deliver supplies from anywhere in the world, it first has to pull into Miami or someplace else and then to Puerto Rico.
Which makes absolutely no sense.
It makes no sense at all.
It's a protectionist measure that's been in there for a long time to protect the U.S. shipping industry, and it's really hurt Puerto Rico before the disaster and needs to be repealed. Nobody even knows more about this than Scott Lincecum. He's from the Cato Institute, an international trade attorney, and really, when it comes to trade, Scott's the man.
Scott, can you tell us what the Jones what is the Jones Amendment? Why did it first come into play?
Yeah, so the Jones Act is officially called the Merchant Marine Act of 1920. It was originally implemented during around the time of World War I, and the idea was to bolster American national security by ensuring a strong shipbuilding industry and a very strong merchant marine. Now, again, that was in 1920, and essentially what the law does is it requires any shipping between U.S. ports, so say from Port of Jacksonville to Puerto Rico, or from the Port of Houston up to the Northeast, that must be done on vessels that are American-built, American-owned, American-flagged,
that is crazy.
And American-crewed.
That is crazy.
Right. So now it's about 100 years old now, and of course the national security implications have changed quite a bit, I would think, since that time. But we also have 100 years of evidence about what the Jones Act actually does, and what we see is that it dramatically inflates the cost of shipping goods, particularly essentials like food and energy, between U.S. ports. And these costs are, of course, ultimately passed on to U.S. consumers. It also, quite ironically, disadvantages American farmers and manufacturers versus foreign imports, which don't have to come from, of course, foreign countries on Jones Act vessels, which, of course, are more expensive than foreign vessels. And then it actually harms the U.S. shipping industry. So we see that the very industry that the Jones Act is designed to protect, is designed to bolster, has actually been severely degraded over the last several decades, and in fact has been found to be, Jones Act vessels have been found to be less safe than vessels that are flagged, that are foreign.
Unbelievable.
Flagged.
Okay, so let's start here. Yesterday, when we were talking about this on the air, the government was still deciding what they were going to do, if they were going to repeal this or suspend this for the time. And we were talking about this morning. They did suspend that, right? They did say this.
So this morning, we found out that the president has issued a 10-day waiver, which is permitted under the Jones Act. So essentially, Puerto Rico for the next 10 days can shipments to Puerto Rico can be on any type of vessel, regardless of the ownership or the flag or whatever.
Well, that's good because I feel like this is a 10-day problem. The whole Puerto Rico, the entire, all the power being gone. About 10 days should do it.
I think 10 days will wrap it all up. They won't even have the ports.
Exactly.
They won't even have the ports open in 10 days.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so, what we found, so studies have actually looked at the economic harms that the Jones Act causes specifically to Puerto Rico. One study found it costs Puerto Rico over $500 million per year. It could get up to $1 billion a year, depending on the year. The New York Fed found pretty significant harms in terms of inflated shipping costs. Others have found the same. Now, I will defend the Trump administration in one sense, and that is that we're really in need of a legislative cure, not an executive cure, because the law ties the executive's hands, requiring them to couch any sort of waiver in terms of national defense. Now, you can make, of course, a national defense argument here. There's a military base in Puerto Rico. Of course, it is, an American territory. These are American citizens and so forth. But the fact is that the executive branch can't actually consider any of these cost arguments. So the fact is they can't say, at least publicly, look, this is just imposing ridiculous, unnecessary costs on suffering Puerto Ricans. They can't say that. Instead, they have to make this kind of circular or circuitous national defense argument.
Just because of the way the law is written.
Exactly, because the law was actually tightened up, believe it or not, in 2009 by our wonderful Congress to essentially DHS has to not only couch its decision in terms of national defense, but it actually has to get a ruling with respect to sufficient port capacity and sufficient fleet, U.S. fleet capacity. So they, again, cannot consider...
What the hell is it? Wait, hang on just a second. Scott, why did the DHS under Obama want this? What possible... What were they looking for? Were they afraid that some ship would come in with a nuke or something? I mean, I'm being serious. What were they afraid of?
Well, I don't think they were afraid of a revolt by the U.S. shipping industry and the unions, I think. The fact is, President Trump, to his credit yesterday, admitted that the pressure against waiver was coming from the U.S. shipping industry, which is highly mobilized and very effective. I mean, they've been able to keep this protectionism in place for 100 years. They're doing a pretty good job at playing defense. Yeah. And the reality is that this is classic protectionist politics. You have concentrated benefits delivered indirectly to the American shipping industry and those unions, and you have these diffuse costs that American consumers typically don't pay attention to, even consumers in Hawaii or Puerto Rico or Alaska who face disproportionate harms. So, the only time we see this type of protectionism actually go away or be reformed is when you have an intense spotlight on the issue and, of course, a very sympathetic victim. And in this case, that's exactly what we have. The spotlight was turned on and the cockroaches scurried away.
And again, this is, as you said, it's been around since 1920. This is not a Trump thing. I think Trump has done what he can do here, but what is more important here is a full repeal of it forever. It's not just a 10-day waiver. Yep. It needs to go away forever. Tell me if these numbers are the same that you have seen.
We have less than a minute.
Scott, real quick. $17 billion in the last 20 years that is the cost for Puerto Rico. A car, think of this. This is not Greenwich, Connecticut. Puerto Rico does not have these high incomes. Yes. A car costs $6,000 more in the mainland. It costs twice as much to ship to Puerto Rico, a U.S. territory, than it does to Jamaica, another country. It makes absolutely no sense.
That's exactly right. And then, even consumers on the mainland suffer. One study showed that we pay an extra 10 to 15 cents per gallon of gas because the Jones Act forces crude oil producers in Texas to actually ship fuel or oil to Canada to be refined instead of northeastern refiners because it's so much cheaper.
Unbelievable.
To do so because they can avoid Jones Act.
Unbelievable. Thank you so much, Scott. I appreciate it. If you want to learn more about this, please do. Scott is really the guy to go to with the Cato Institute, but we have to alert our congressmen and our senators. This has got to stop.
Good morning, Glenn. Good to speak with you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for all you've done so far, for all of the hurricane victims and all that.
Thank you.
I wanted to call in because your discussions on the Jones Act needs to be looked into a lot closer, a little bit more homework in that the Jones Act is the act that actually granted the citizenship, the U.S. citizenship, to those born on the island past, to date, I can't remember the date, Glenn, but it's the actual act that does give us the citizenship. So a full repeal of that act is
right. But I think
it's actually the merchant. And it's not that. You're right. That's a misstatement. It's not the full repeal of that. It is the merchant marine part of that affects shipping. Is what we're talking.
You're right, Ed. You're technically right, and we're sorry we misstated that. And thanks for clearing that up. But it is the merchant marine part of the Jones Act, and I think we can all agree. When I was down in Puerto Rico a year ago, I think 2 years ago, and the poverty is just outrageous. And part of it is because they can't dig themselves out of. They get a lot of good things from America, but they also get a lot of bad things. For instance, unions. They can't create enough jobs because of all of the restrictions we put on them. They're already an island. We have to start removing a lot of these restrictions to help the people of Puerto Rico. Tomorrow is the last day for the Obamacare repeal. It's not going to happen. Donald Trump yesterday came out and said, don't worry, we have the votes to do it next year. I doubt that is true. Why wait a year? So that's off the table now. We are now looking at a tax plan. And can we get this done? I was a little underwhelmed by what the tax plan was, but at least it's a step in the right direction. If we could even get this passed, we are negotiating. It's weird because he's good at negotiating with Kim Jong-un. He just calls him and says, I don't care who you are, little short rocket man. And it is enough to get people to quake in their boots and get things done. With his strategy with the Democrats has been radically different. And he's starting at a place that I wouldn't be happy with if we ended there, but at least it would be a step in the right direction. Here are the details of the plan.
So there is a lot of good in there, and it's important to note. This is not one of those situations where you're like, I don't know, is this even better than Obamacare?
Oh, no,
this is a absolute improvement to our tax system.
So wait, let me rephrase this so I make myself clear. What I don't like about this is if it ends here, let's just say they magically get up and Chucky Schumer says, I love this. We could have done, but we could do better than this. We can do better than this. Mm-hmm. However, should we pursue this with all of our might? Yes, but I'm concerned that the margins are so small in some areas that by the time you negotiate, it's marginal. It's not nominal, but it's marginal.
Yeah, if it started somewhere else and ended here, I wouldn't be thrilled, but I would be, okay, we got something there. Yes. It's the fact that we're starting here does make me nervous.
Yes.
And so there are some good things in the plan. There are some bad and scary things. The good things, the corporate tax drops significantly. We have the highest corporate tax rate in the world. It drops in this plan to 20%.
Should be lower than that. Should be 10 to 15. You want to change the world? You want to really dominate and have jobs come here, change the corporate rate to 10%.
Yeah, and Trump wanted, I think, 15. So he was trying to get it to 15 in the campaign. They're starting here with 20.
Why?
Now, 20 is is what you would call a competitive rate.
Yes.
With the rest of the world. The average, I think, is 22.5 in the industrialized world. So it's slightly less than that, but that's a good improvement. I mean, a big one. And you shouldn't just dismiss it. It's also good for small businesses who will...
If it ends at 20.
If it ends at 20. I'm taking this plan as if this is what you got. Right. So
you want to compete with the world. We have other costs. We have unions. We have regulation. So we have other costs. You want to compete. You have to come in lower than the rest of the world because their workers are going to have health care, everything else. It's just you want to be dramatically lower.
Yeah, and I agree with that. To push back a little bit on that point, though, I think people want to do business in the United States. If you have a choice and everything is equal cost, people will go to the United States because we have a lot of sort of institutional advantages when it comes to business. We still do things better than the rest of the world.
We do.
The issue is we've been so uncompetitive for such a long time with these tax rates. This at least moves us into a competitive position, and it's a real positive.
I would say that you are also now moving into a world that is beginning to be convinced at the highest levels that America's best days are behind her. Whether it's true or not doesn't matter. Perception is reality. That America's days our best days are behind her, and that the United States could go unstable. If you add instability, if you add protest and riots on our streets and instability at all, where an army needs to be called up to quash things, people do not want to work in the United States. They'll be looking for someplace else.
Yeah, and that's always a risk, right?
Yes.
On the individual rates, so one of the big things that I've already heard, we talked about this yesterday briefly, but I've already heard left-wing commentators make this point, which is the way it works is it simplifies 7 different brackets into 3. The lowest bracket in the old plan was 10%. The lowest bracket in the new plan is 12%. So obviously, to anyone who's just looking at this at a surface way,
gosh, they're raising taxes on the poor.
And they've raised taxes on the poor and they've cut taxes for the rich. It's the talking point already. So when you actually look at this, it's not true at all. It is not going to affect basically anyone in that way. It is going to, because what they're doing is they're raising the standard deduction. They're doubling it in this plan. Again, you're getting into the weeds when you start talking about this, but basically, if you take the standard deduction, you're not going to be paying taxes on the entire first bracket. So your first bracket rate will really be 0. But the way that it's worded is going to easily allow people to claim they're raising taxes on the poor. These are the way that, and this is some of this. It's not all clear here. It's not all wins for as far as lower rates. Listen to this: the 10% rate goes to 12%. And the 15% rate that currently is out there also goes to 12%. So a slight cut for the second bracket and a slight raise for the bottom one. But the standard deduction is going to knock a lot of that out for most people anyway. When it gets a little higher, it's interesting. The 25% bracket that currently exists stays the same. It goes to 25. The 28% bracket, you're talking about people making about $100,000 a year now. Those people go from 28 to 25. So a slight decrease. Now, the people now we're up to, let's say, $200,000. Those people, their rate actually goes up. That bracket goes from 33 to 35. The current 35% bracket stays the same, does not go down, 35 to 35. And those are people making about $400,000. And then the very top bracket, it goes from 39.6 to 35. This is getting all the publicity because this is their way to say that rich people are getting the tax break. Now, it's interesting because your whole way up there, really, to get that tax break, you're going to have to make a lot of money. And even then, you're not really going to get it because they're going to take away a lot of these deductions. However, there is a Planet X in this plan.
Does it have a fiery tail?
It does have a fiery tail. You remember Planet X? It was going to destroy the country on September 23rd in the world.
No, that's not what he said, but yes.
No, it was going to destroy the world.
Right.
Because a big planet was going to come by, and we hadn't seen it yet.
Got it.
And it's this unnamed planet. Well, we might think we know the planets, but no. There's a Planet X, right?
Okay, what's the Planet X here?
You might think you know the brackets, because there's 3 brackets. However, written into this plan, in the plan,
oh boy,
is a 4th bracket. Now, the 4th bracket...
Wait, do I want to open the 4th bracket?
It's bracket X.
Like, I'm having an okay day. I'm not having a great day, but I'm having an okay day.
Oh, yes. You're going to love this one because bracket X is a bracket that can be instituted in negotiations above the top rate. Mm-hmm. So right now, the top rate is 35%. Mm-hmm. But with bracket X, the top rate could be anything higher than 35%. So this is actually very similar to what Steve Bannon was floating out there before he left, which is take a number for wealthy people and make that the kind of billboard number, make that higher. So raising it from 39.6 into the 40s and maybe the 50s. Jack that thing through the ceiling so you can say, oh, well, you know what, we're punishing the rich people.
Making $1 million, we're going to make it 60%.
Yeah. And so they're going to jack those people up to some ridiculous rate. And that is in the plan as a possibility. It's not concrete in the plan, but it's there.
You know who did this?
Who?
Come on.
Satan?
Close. Wilson. I want you to act today and secure your family's future by being prepared. I trust my Patriot Supply with my food storage, and I would highly recommend that you do the same. These are the people that, my grandmother used to can stuff. My grandmother, my aunt, and my mom, and then eventually my sisters. I wish I would have, learned how to do it myself. I have no idea. We'd all be dead in a week if I had to can something. But that's the way we used to have food storage. And we did it because, everybody in my family was working stiff. And you never knew if, somebody's going to lose their job or times were just going to get tough. And times around my house were tough a lot. And so we would go down into our food pantry and we would grab something from, the fruit cellar and bring it up. My Patriot Supply is the modern way of doing this. Now they have a 102 serving survival food kit. It is healthy. It lasts up to 25 years, and it's less than $1 per serving. You get breakfast, lunch, and dinner shipped to your home for free. Call 1-800-200-7163 or order online at preparewithglenn.com. A prepared America is a strong America. And that is my Patriot Supply's mission. So call 800-200-7163 or preparewithglenn.com. Everybody has an opinion. And I don't think anybody's opinion is more valuable than anybody else's. I've been doing this for 40 years, and it still is remarkable to me that people care about my opinion, because I barely do. And as I get older, the more I realize, yeah, it's just another guy's opinion. And now that everybody has Facebook and Twitter and you're a publisher, you realize the power that each of us have now? Just 10 years ago, if you wanted your voice to be heard, you really had to do something. I mean, you really had to, you had to go through and network and get jobs and get on the air and then make that a success. And you wanted to publish a book, you have to go to Simon & Schuster or something like that. You'd have to go to these crazy, it's crazy. You should go to these meetings with me. Crazy meetings in these gigantic New York boardrooms. You don't have to do any of that now. And so while we have made all of that meaningless, all those hoops that you had to jump through, we have found so many people with different opinions now that they wouldn't have been able to have a voice. And it's really good. But everybody has an opinion, and so it devalues, it puts into perspective how much somebody's opinion is worth. No more than somebody else. What is worthwhile is perspective, because that's hard to find. That takes a lifetime. And sometimes it takes just standing in another place. Everybody can view an event one way, but there might be Zapruder. There might be somebody who's standing in another location with another angle, and they capture something that nobody else saw. That's perspective. think that's what we should all be seeking. Not more opinions. I read an article. I read an article from somebody who's really important to the conservative movement. Here's the title. As I lay literally dying, politics doesn't matter. I write this with multiple blood clots currently in my lungs. By the end of the day, I'm tired and out of breath. My chest is tight. Thankfully, this go-around is not fatal, but a year ago, I was rushed to an ICU with my blood oxygen level steadily declining below 90%, and my lungs were slowly suffocating me. And as nurses were sticking needles in my arms and pumping me full of fluids, doctors were calling my wife to tell her that they thought I had lung cancer. I have to tell you that American politics really doesn't matter when you have kids and you're dying. You begin to seriously ask yourself, what do you want your kids to know if you're gone? If I would have died, my kids would have learned everything about me from Google. They would only know what people who hate me think about me. I was far more worried about my kids' relationship with God and their mother than about politics or the political fight of the day. American politics today is such a small ball gutter politics. The stakes are so small that the fights are all that matters. I don't want my kids to have any part of that. Yes, there are fights that do matter, but there are many more fights you think matter than actually do. Having very nearly died, my priorities have taken more than a small shift in the last year. I'd rather be preaching than blogging. My faith is way more important to me. My kids' faith is way more important to me than my own faith. They're the priority. That's perspective. I would pray for you and for me that we can find that perspective that Eric Erickson found without getting the diagnosis that he had received. Is a New York Times bestselling author, The Miracle of Freedom, The 7 Tipping Points That Saved the World, which is a fantastic book. Ted Stewart is that author. He was a U.S. District Court judge appointed by Bill Clinton. He was, a Utah chief of staff to the Utah governor, executive director of the State Department of Natural Resources, blah, blah, blah. And just a really, really smart guy and concerned about the direction of our country, and has put together a book, Supreme Power, the 7 pivotal Supreme Court decisions that had a major impact on America. And I want to talk to him about that. But Ted, I actually want to start here. This is something that Chuck Todd on Meet the Press said yesterday, and maybe you can help educate everybody on where he went wrong. Listen to this audio.
Roy Moore, where the phrase Christian conservative doesn't even begin to describe him, could very well be your next U.S. Senator. And if you don't understand just how freaked out some folks in the GOP and the White House are about what that means, then you don't know Roy Moore. First off, he doesn't appear to believe in the Constitution as it's written.
Our rights don't come from government. They don't come from a Bill of Rights. They come from Almighty God.
Now, that's just a taste of what are very fundamentalist views that have gotten him removed from office twice as Alabama's Chief Justice.
Ted, I believe that almost everyone would have to be removed from office up until maybe 20 years ago, with an exception of maybe FDR and Woodrow Wilson, if that were not true. Can you explain to the American people where rights come from and why it's important?
Well, I don't have to give my opinion on that, because we can rely on the language of those who created this government. The Constitution of the United States as motivated by the Declaration of Independence, where it is stated with absolute clarity that rights come from God. The role of government is to protect those rights. In order for government to operate, we have to surrender a certain amount of our rights to that government for the protection of the bulk of the rights. And whenever government takes from the people more rights than we have voluntarily surrendered, that is tyranny. And that is the foundation of our government. That was what the Constitution was intended to put into place and to protect.
So Ted, you and I know this, and you know that you cannot separate the Constitution from the Declaration of Independence, but the progressives will teach and have taught, I think even Chuck Todd, that the Declaration of Independence has nothing to, it's just a document. That's all that is. The Constitution is the only founding document that means anything, and it doesn't clearly state that as clearly as it does in the Declaration of Independence.
I cannot cite specifically to the Supreme Court decisions, but there have been, during the 230-year history of our country, at least one, if not more, Supreme Court decisions which have stated that, in fact, the Declaration of Independence is part of the founding documents that the court must consider when it is interpreting the Constitution itself.
So you wrote this book about the pivotal Supreme Court decisions that really have changed everything. And as I read through it, you would never think that the hours of a bakery would actually take you to abortion, but that's exactly what happened. Can you explain that? Because that's, I think, one of the seven. I don't remember which one it was, but I think it's Lochner versus New York, if I look at it, that says, this is about a bakery and baker's hours, and we get an abortion out of that.
It was a 1905 case. The issue was whether or not a New York statute that limited the hours that bakers could require their employees to work. It was challenged, and the Supreme Court struck it down. And in doing so, they said that there is a liberty interest, the right to contract. That meant that an employee could, because of that liberty interest, contract with an employer to work as many hours as that employee wanted. It was not a big issue for very long, because subsequently the Supreme Court changed its position. But what it did is it created a power in the courts to define what liberty means under the Fifth and 14th Amendments to the Constitution. And that ability to determine what the word means, basically removing it to a large extent from our elected officials, subsequently became the basis for Roe versus Wade, restricting the right of states to limit abortions. Most recently, the case of Obergefell versus Hodges. And in that latter mentioned case, the dissenters specifically said, you guys are just playing this Lochner game. You're resurrecting, again, this theory that courts by themselves get to define what liberty is. And, that is fine as long as what they're trying to do, they meaning the Supreme Court, are trying to discern what the founders meant by liberty, or what those who wrote the 14th Amendment after the Civil War meant by liberty. But in the case of Obergefell specifically, they came up with their own idea of what liberty was and imposed it upon the American people. In that Obergefell decision, there was a very telling dissent by Justice Scalia, and it was really the thing that motivated me in the end to write this book. And Justice Scalia said this. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, he said, I don't much care about the marriage laws of the United States. I don't care what the respective states do with marriage. But he went on to say, but I do care about who rules over me. And then he said, this decision today tells me that the ruler of myself and 320 million Americans are 5 lawyers on the Supreme Court. And I think that very stark statement by Justice Scalia more or less got me to say, do the American people understand the extent to which the Supreme Court has shaped America? Do they understand that the America that we live in today has been decided by many factors, but the Supreme Court has played a key role? And most importantly, are they comfortable with the role that
So
Supreme Court.
So Ted, not too many people know this. The Supreme Court was, it's an equal branch of the government, but it didn't even have a place to meet. It met in the basement of the Capitol for a long time. That's where the Supreme Court was. It didn't have this huge building. That was FDR that kind of elevated this. They've been fighting and trying to, since 1803, as you point out in your book, fighting for their place and saying, no, we are the arbiters of what's constitutional and what's what's unconstitutional. We've gotten to a place so far where what they say is God and it rules over all of us. Is there a way to reverse it?
Well, I think the only way we reverse that is to reverse those who are appointed to the judiciary at every level, but in particular the 9 members of the Supreme Court. I point out one of the little stories I tell in the book is about how the only justice to ever come from the state of Utah was a man named George Sutherland. He was appointed by President Harding in 1922. His nomination was sent to the Congress the same day. He was confirmed the same day. Sutherland was not even in the country, and he was made aware of his appointment and confirmation by a letter from the president, almost as an aside. And the reason why that is important is it tells you that in 1922, Supreme Court justice appointments were not that big of a deal because the Supreme Court itself had not interposed itself in the ways that it has since in shaping America. In contrast that with the fight over Justice Gorsuch, where I understand that literally millions of dollars were spent for and against him in certain states trying to get the senators to either vote to confirm him or not to. That I think is great evidence of how much power the Supreme Court has assumed and has had given to it, if you will, by the nature of our congressional and presidential actions today.
Judge Ted Stewart, the name of the book is Supreme Power, 7 Pivotal Supreme Court Decisions That Had a Major Impact on America. If you've never read a book by Ted, you need to. Really, really good. Very, very clear. And this book is a great place to start and say, what the hell happened? How did we get here? And what is the way back? Thanks, Ted.
Thank you, Glenn.
How many of us will be able to say, I made a difference? And I don't mean in one other person's life, because you just never know. But I mean, you've changed a culture. I don't think there's a lot of people that can say that. Hugh Hefner died at 91, and good or bad, he changed our culture.
No kidding. He published The Playboy Philosophy in 1962. That's when it started. 25 installments. The cause is abortion rights. Certainly, everyone that's you can't even oppose that in the Democratic Party. They'll cut off your funding. Decriminalization of marijuana, and of course the repeal of 19th century sex laws. All of those,
except for the sex laws one. You just never convince me that is a healthy thing. But instead, everything but the sex laws really has been repealed.
Those are, but what do you mean? Which laws are you talking about? I mean, I think that would just
prostitution.
Okay, yeah,
we're
sex
moving
workers,
on. Yeah, we're moving on.
And that's happened in one state.
One state, but the marijuana thing is
basically happened. But I mean, the
lost.
loosening of the standards when it comes to sexuality is.
Yeah, and it's all one man.
Hi, Stu.
Good to see
Glenn,
you today.
You as well. You as well.
It's okay to see you.
Okay, not necessarily good.
Not necessarily good, but not bad. I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just okay to see you.
How could you take that in a bad way?
Exactly right. So Pat's getting ready to do his program. Meaningful follows this one. We want to talk to him about a couple of things, but we were just in the break. We were talking about the new tax plan.
Isn't it great?
Yeah, it's great. And watching MSNBC up here, and it talks about. The top tax payers, they're gonna get benefits out of this. Well, it's 2% of the population. Why? 0.2% of the population. Why is this such a big deal? And is there any place? Do progressives and socialists need to have every place on earth?
Well, yeah. I don't know why, but they do.
Can't they? I mean, you have Canada, you have the rest of the world, and it's not working. Can we just have one place? Just one. I'll take a state, Texas. Just leave us alone.
Yeah.
Why can't we have that?
Giant man-made islands off the coast in international waters. It's
will
the only
live
solution.
there. I will live there.
And then that'll get screwed up in a few years too, but then you can always put another one up.
Yeah, once you get one up, then you're like, I'm building my own platform.
Yeah. Everyone will just have their own island in the middle of
right.
the water, and we'll all be happy. Surely. It'll work out perfectly.
Yeah. I'm willing to do it. I mean, it would probably be good for I'm willing to try. Is there no place where free men can just be free? If this were different, if there was yet another space just over the horizon and we're like, I don't know, sea monsters could eat you and you might fall off the face of the earth. But I hear there's this great place where you can just go and be yourself.
I'm willing to try.
I would. At this point, I would. I really would. I'd be like, okay, let's go.
Let's take our chances with the sea monsters.
I really would. Let's go. Mars, I don't know if you saw what Elon Musk is talking about. Have you seen his Mars rocket?
I don't know if I've seen a picture of it.
You would know it if you saw it. I saw an interview with him, and I'm like, wait. That's your Mars rocket? It is 40 stories tall. It can fit a fully loaded, with passengers, all the cargo, all the luggage, a 747 inside its cargo hold. Okay? It's outrageous how big this thing is. And so I'm thinking to myself, that's crazy. That's not going to, how is it? It's like, I can't even remember how the thrust on this thing. It's crazy, the thrust to get this up. And I'm listening to it, and I'm thinking, that's never going to happen. And he said, the interviewer said, okay, so your timeline is 10 years? And he said, yeah. I mean, that's what we say. And I'm thinking, it's probably 15, 20 years. And he said, but internally, we're a little more aggressive. We'd like to do it in 5. Holy cow.
Wow.
But I'm thinking, he's talking about 1 million people in 10 years on Mars.
In 10 years?
In 10 years, putting 1 million people on Mars.
No way that can happen. No way.
That's what I think, too. But you know what? Don't count him out.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Past him. Yeah. Although I will say the thrust needed to lift that thing off the Earth would wipe out every emission that he supposedly saved from the entire project.
Yeah, I don't think he cares at that point. He's all like, see you later, suckers. When you see 1 million people up in Mars, I might consider that.
And a lot of people would like you to do it.
Yeah, I know.
Mm-hmm.
I know.
Including a couple in this room, if I'm
okay.
not mistaken.
All right. I think this is turning ugly on me, so let's go right over to Pat and find out what's on his mind today.
A little depressed today.
Oh, my gosh.
Hugh Hefner, we lost him.
Oh, boy.
We lost him.
Oh, boy.
Did you just break it to us like that?
Well, he's sick. No, he doesn't feel good at all. He's dead.
Oh, my.
Well, okay, good. Thank you for taking me all the way through that.
Yeah.
91. And I love the Twitter love for him. All of these celebrities and fans telling him what an uncompromising force he was. Rest in peace.
He was. Oh. He was.
Your legacy and soul shall live on forever.
And some would say in a never-ending burning lake of fire, but
some would say that.
It will go on.
I'm not his judge, but I'm just saying he's going to burn in the fires of hell. He got generations of men hooked on porn. What a legacy. It leads to sexual dysfunction, marital problems. He probably contributed pretty well to the divorce rate in this country.
Sure he did.
I bet he did.
I'm sure he did.
He paid women to have sex with him and live with him. He exploited and objectified women. And by the way, where's the women's groups on that? Nobody's saying this guy wasn't a good guy.
You know why? You know why they didn't? Because one of the first things he did is said, I'm going to take on abortion. Mm-hmm. I believe in free abortions.
Of course he does.
Yeah. That way,
of course he does.
That way,
it would have wiped out his whole net worth if he had to pay for them.
but also that way he got all the women's groups that they're real. They don't care about women. They care about they care about
their agenda. Their leftist agenda.
Yeah.
There is no way that guy didn't contribute greatly to the moral breakdown of this country.
I don't think.
Did.
So we were just talking about this, Pat. I don't know of somebody. When we all die.
Mm-hmm.
Very few of us, people are going to say they made an impact.
Hugh Hefner made an impact.
Yeah, really rare that somebody dies and you say that person changed a culture. He did.
He did.
He changed a culture. I can't think of anybody who has led to more bad stuff in our culture,
seriously,
in my lifetime than Hugh Hefner.
We went from a society that couldn't show a married couple in bed together to naked women in magazines all over the place, to billboards that can show everything, to where we are now. And we went there pretty quickly after Playboy debuted.
And really, outside of the Elle Macpherson issue, it's hard to point to real positives. I mean, now I think we all would admit.
No, he got some things right.
He got some things right.
Some things right. I want to.
Nobody's saying he featured ugly women. I don't think anybody's saying. In fact, I would have liked to have heard that conversation between he and St. Peter on the other side.
Oh, that would have been interesting.
Okay, so it says here that you lived your life in your jammies and took pictures of naked women your whole life. Hugh, you've already experienced heaven on earth. We got something else in mind for you now.
Do you think he ever got to a point to where he was like, man, I wear pajamas every day. I'm gonna take the day off and I want to spend the day in a suit.
You'd have to, I guess. You'd want tight-fitting clothes.
Well, yeah, I'm tired of just always having to wear the pajamas.
Way too comfortable all the time.
I just want to wear a tie.
The coverage was interesting too because they had. First of all, he was buried next to Marilyn Monroe, which is kind of an interesting twist to this.
Yeah, it is.
But all the news. He's a big celebrity. People know who he is. Mm-hmm. So they're doing this big, hey, let's. This is what, of course, every news broadcast does now. It's like, oh, hello, someone you know has died over the night. We have really nothing to say about it, so let's feature tweets from other people you might know. Like, for example,
crazy.
And they'll just cycle through like mediocre celebrities saying like, Hugh Hefner's soul is what you will live on forever. Right. So they did this, and they're cycling through the typical celebrities that we're mentioning and people who are his contemporaries that are somehow still alive. And then they get to Jesse Jackson.
Now listen to this. This is great. Listen to this.
Jesse Jackson goes, Hugh Hefner, a man, I don't have the exact quotes, I'm paraphrasing. Hugh Hefner, a man who stood up and fought tough battles for civil rights. He will always be remembered. Aren't you a reverend? A reverend is remembering Hugh Hefner like that. Now, he did fight for that.
The answer to that is no, he's not a reverend.
No, and that's the thing. He's
he's not.
You know anybody in his congregation?
I don't
either. I don't.
No, it doesn't happen. I want to make sure that you know about Puerto Rico. The hurricane victims are having a hard time getting help. And that's for a few reasons. The ports are all down, so getting ships there. It is why we didn't send the USS Comfort right away, because the ports could not take. This is the Puerto Rican governor said, please don't send it. Ports can't take it, and so we haven't sent it. I think it's on its way, but it's not there yet. They're still trying to work on all of the ports, which is stopping supplies from coming in. Also, the USS Comfort was not there because the governor of Puerto Rico said, could you help us please fix the hospitals first? So that's what we're trying to do, is get the hospitals up and running. I know Team Rubicon and Mercury One are trying. They already have one team on the ground there, but we're trying to get more on the ground. The problem is we think we can get supplies there. We think we can pull that off. But the real problem is, how do you get them from the airport? The supplies are coming off of these, containers that are on these giant cargo planes. They're coming off, but they're just sitting there now at the airport because there's no fuel for any trucks. They can't find the truck drivers because there's no cell service. They can't organize anything yet. This is going to take a kind of a Marshall Plan airlift to get this thing done.
And we've had so many natural disasters lately, taken the focus off of a few of the really important things going on. The opioid crisis is something we've talked about a little bit, and it's a huge crisis in the country. Vice did an article about the secret lives of functioning heroin users, and they had some interesting perspective.
Functioning heroin.
Apparently, they're still trying to work, but one of the things is that the economic situation has really played into this and had people, it's worse and worse because of the economic situation. This is what Vice writes. Ed Murray has helped create Seattle's economic troubles. He resigned as the city's mayor a couple weeks ago because he sexually abused 5 young men and boys.
Jeez.
In 2014, Seattle's Progressive City Council voted to increase the city's minimum wage to $15 an hour over a period of years. The left rejoiced. Murray had run on a platform calling for the raise. 3 years later, things haven't worked out the way the central planners wanted. When Seattle officials voted 3 years ago to incrementally boost the city's minimum wage up to $15 an hour, they'd hoped to improve the lives of low-income workers, reported the Washington Post. Yet, according to a major new study that could force economists to reassess past research on the issue, the hike has had the opposite effect. Of course. Some employers have not been able to afford the increased minimums. They've cut their payrolls, putting off new hiring, reducing hours, or letting their workers go, the study found. Did the Seattle council members pause? No. The heroes of the people are unstoppable. Seattle City Council voted unanimously to create a new income tax on high earners.
It's going to drive those people out.
Amazing. The measure requires residents making more than $250,000 annually or couples making over $500,000 to pay an extra 2.25% tax on incomes above these levels. It was initially voted down, but they're going to try to push it through.
I will tell you, the only things that are saving Seattle, Microsoft, Amazon, and Costco. Those 3 businesses.
Microsoft, Amazon, and Costco. No Starbucks? Doesn't Starbucks get credit for something?
Yeah, I guess Starbucks. Maybe.
In.
I don't know how many people they employ in Seattle, but I mean, in an actual headquarters sort of way.
Right, sure.
But they're changing, the Amazon and Apple, and to some degree, Costco, changing, really, truly changing everything. And how long can you afford? Because this is only going to get worse. This is what progressives do. They start on one thing, and then that doesn't work, so then they have to change another thing, and then that doesn't work, and then they have to change another thing, and they impoverish everyone all along the way. It's where California is, and it just becomes unlivable, and people become wards of the state. They can't get out, they can't afford to get out, and you're trapped there. And before that happens, usually companies leave. Now, because Microsoft and I would imagine Amazon are so progressive that they're going to do everything they can, but at some point you leave because you can't afford business there. And then what happens?